Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Linda Cobert. I am TMA's Research and Communications Director, and I will be moderating this session. I want to thank you all for joining this webinar. So just a few bits of housekeeping before we get started today. Everyone's phone will be muted throughout the presentation. However, we encourage you to ask questions. There's a chat box located at the bottom of your screen. You can type your questions into this box at any time throughout the presentation. We will have a question and answer period at the end of Dr. Weil's talk. This webinar will be recorded and will live on our website for future reference. I would now like to introduce Mary McGowan, Executive Director of the Myositis Association.
Thank you, Lynn's webinar, Position Your Grant for Success. I'm Mary McGowan, Executive Director of the Myositis Association, also known as TMA. TMA is most excited about the upcoming grant cycle. This provides an extraordinary opportunity for young fellows and researchers to receive grant money for important work and possible discoveries in the field of myositis. For those of you who are not familiar with TMA, I want to spend just a few minutes providing a quick introduction to our organization and our very exciting grant program. Next slide, please. The Myositis Association is the leading international nonprofit association supporting those living with myositis, their care partners, and the medical community and researchers who care for them. We were founded in 1993 by a patient. Betty Curie was her name. She was living with IBM, and she began the association with just 12 patients. And since then, we have grown to an international organization reaching thousands of patients and clinicians. TMA celebrated its 25th anniversary just last year, and we are now an international collaborator of researchers advancing discoveries. Next slide, please. It's really a five-prong approach of what we do. We educate myositis patients and care partners and clinicians. We support patients and care partners and the medical community. We advocate for research and policies that meet the needs of patients. We fund critical research, seeking understanding, new treatments, and ultimately a cure. And we increase awareness of myositis internationally with emphasis on the medical community. Next slide, please. We have a very esteemed medical advisory board. This is a global board, very entrenched in our organization on a daily basis. They serve as faculty for all of our programmatic activities. They approve all of our educational materials, and Dr. Andrew Mammon is currently the chair of this very esteemed group of myositis experts. Next slide, please. So we know at TMA that the myositis patient's best hope for a cure lies in research. And this is why we are so focused on working toward better understanding, better treatments, and ultimately a cure for all forms of myositis. For providing support for young investigators who innovative pilot projects explore inflammatory myopathies. For fostering collaborative relationships among myositis researchers and clinicians. And for recruiting patients to enroll in myositis clinical trials and observational studies and registries on an ongoing basis. Next slide, please. So since 2002, TMA has provided funding nearly $7 million into myositis research. TMA offers funding for research into any type of immune-mediated myopathy. We really have two different programs for funding. One is for mentored research fellowships. So this is really designed to help promising junior investigators who have demonstrated commitment to the field of myositis. And TMA provides salary support for up to $50,000 per year for a 2-year period. The second part of what we fund are for pilot project grants. This is for funding for new and innovative research projects to enable the project to attract future funding from other sources, such as the NIH. And TMA awards up to $100,000 annually for up to 2-year period. Next slide, please. So in 2018, just to give you a sense, from a pool of 16 applicants, the following projects were awarded funding. There was a $19,000 grant awarded to Stephen Greenberg for a pilot study on imaging. There was a grant of $100,000 to Lisa Christopher Stein for a study about the gut and skin in patients with DM. And a fellowship grant of $100,000 was awarded to Joanna Parks for the project role of innate immune and metabolic pathways in mediating muscle weakness in myositis. Next slide, please. So TMA's research successes overall have included the following: pilot projects that have successfully achieved NIH R01 funding, fellowship projects that have developed new understanding about myositis phenotypes, treatment responses, biomarkers, and more. Key historic myositis projects, including follistin gene therapy studies, a project to develop the first successful xenograft model for IBM, support for the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences study of environmental risk factors in myositis, recruitment for the Yale IBM registry, and receiving nearly $180,000 from CDC to build the MyoVision Myositis Registry. Next slide, please. So as you can see, we've had great success with the TMA Research Grant Program, and again, are so excited to have you join us today on this webinar. It is now my honor to introduce Dr. Conrad Weihl, Professor of Neurology at Washington University School of Medicine in St. Louis. Dr. Weihl has served on TMA's esteemed Medical Advisory Board and is chair of TMA's Research Committee. His clinical practice focuses on the diagnosis and care of patients with hereditary and acquired muscle diseases. He is also an active basic and translational research program aimed at understanding the pathogenic mechanism of muscle degeneration. Thank you, Dr. Weihl, for joining us today and for providing an overview about TMA's research efforts and how to position your grant application for success. Dr. Weihl?
Great, thank you. I want to make sure everyone can hear me, and maybe I'm going to assume that they can. So I wanted to start just by telling something personal about my experience in both of these award mechanisms. So I actually received a Mentor Career Award fellowship finishing my neurology residency and moving into fellowship training, and was able to use that time to carve out some free time during my clinical training so that I had some protected time in the lab of Alan Pestronk so that I could kind of begin my career. And so that was very helpful in order to do that. And I'm going to share with you some of the key points for a successful grant. The other grant that I was able to get was more recently, within the last 3 or 4 years, prior to being on the TMA board, and that was to do a pilot project where we were able to take patients who had sporadic inclusion body myositis. We'd collected DNA on patients and had a large biorepository, and the idea was to use this and to perform next generation sequencing to look for pathogenic leads that might lead us into further funding. And so with that, we identified a novel risk factor, and we're now moving that forward to try to understand that from both a basic science as well as a translational science aspect within our lab. So those are just two aspects of how this research program has been instrumental in pushing both protecting my time as an independent researcher in the beginning, and then allowing me to move my research into a novel and new direction. Can I have the next slide, please? So I wanted to talk about really the nuts and bolts of the grants, and then I was going to talk a little bit about some aspects of how to write a really good and competitive grant. So initially, the TMA's grant cycle, there'll be a request for proposals, which is says spring, but I think that includes now. We start requesting proposals. There will be a letter of intent deadline, May 15th, and then in June 15th, we'll require a proposal. The October 1st was whenever the project will be announced. So the key aspects to remember are the May 15th letter of intent and June 15th, the final proposal. And we're going to talk about the letter of intent. And the next slide, please. So the letter of intent is something that means something. It is important to focus on that letter of intent. The letter of intent does a couple of things. One is it allows us to make sure that this is going to be a competitive project. We want to make sure that the project that we review is not going to be something that won't be funded whenever it's reviewed by the larger panel. I don't want to waste our reviewers' times, and I certainly don't want to waste any of your time if I don't think, or if the committee doesn't feel that it's going to be a competitive project. The other aspect is that we want to make sure that the letter of intent includes that it clearly references what we're looking for in the grant announcement. So in the letter of intent, it should clearly state that if it's a pilot project, give evidence about how this is a new project for either your research group or the lab, and how it is an innovative project, so something that is risky and normally wouldn't be funded, and then how potentially it could lead to future grant support. So all three of those elements need to be mentioned in the cover letter so that we can see that this is going to be a competitive pilot project. For a fellowship funding, the applicant must be within 3 years of completing training, and that's for their terminal degree, whether that's training as a PhD scientist, whether that's training as a resident in a clinical program, or whether that's finishing training as a clinical fellowship. And so it should be stated clearly. Sometimes it can be hard to tell where people are in their training. And so by stating it very clearly, it will help us make sure that you will be competitive for this grant. In addition, you need to identify the mentor. And so this is a mentored project, so it doesn't provide money for doing the research, it provides salary support. So a mentor needs to be identified. In addition, on the another page should have a description of the specific aims of the project. And so this should then give us an idea of what the project is going to be. And finally, a biosketch that's in NIH format. And the reason we wanted an NIH format is so that we can compare amongst different applicants. If somebody sends a CV that has more information than the biosketch, it's hard to then compare. So we want everyone to kind of be at the same level of using an NIH biosketch. If you can't, if you don't know what an NIH biosketch is, you can just Google, and the NIH format is online, and you can use that. Next slide, please. So I want to talk about the pilot projects and what we're looking for. So we've taken some time over the last year or two to really re-understand the best way that the TMA can use its funds. And one is by funding pilot projects. So this can't be funding an existing project that already has funding in the lab. This isn't funding part of a project. This isn't funding something that will help the lab continue in the same direction. This is really evidence that we're funding a new research direction that normally would not be funded or done, an innovative research project. Innovation is something that we'll talk about a little bit later. This can be for somebody that's an established investigator who's new to the field of myositis, or this can be an established myositis investigator who has a new and innovative project. The goal is to demonstrate a path toward independent funding. That's how these grants will be measured for their success, is how many go on to get independent funding, whether that's NIH, whether that's MDA, whether that's engagement with industry, something that allows this project to move further. It needs to be evidence that it is a true pilot project, so that it really is a high risk, high reward, innovative project. So it's something that wouldn't be funded typically by other grants. And so how do you have a high risk, high reward grant and prove that you can actually do it? If you say, hey, it's a high risk grant, it may never work. That's true, and that's okay, but you have to demonstrate feasibility. So while you don't need preliminary data for a pilot project, you do need to show that you have feasibility. And so the example I would give has to do with my own example of doing genetics on patients with sporadic IBM. So I didn't know what that was going to show, but I had to prove that I had the patient samples, that I had the ability and technology to do it, whether that meant that I needed to show that I had a collaborator that could help with the data analysis, or whether that meant that I had to show that I had an environmental infrastructure that could do it. So feasibility is very important for a high-risk, high-reward project. So I want to make sure that you can actually do the project. Can I have that next slide, please? So a successful mentored research fellowship award has some other elements to it. So first off, I want to just mention the eligibility. That's really important. As I said on the letter of intent, I want to make sure that that's clearly stated. So a candidate should have completed residency, fellowship training, or have received their PhD within 3 years to commencing the fellowship. So that not whenever you apply for it, but whenever you're commencing the fellowship. And the fellowship would commence in late October, and so you'd have to have evidence that you'd be in your 3rd year, or no later than your 3rd year at that time. In addition, it needs to be performed under the supervision of an established mentor. So this is somebody who has a track record, not just of doing the research, but a track record of mentoring independent researchers as they move on to their path. Can I have the next slide, please? So there are, I think often we focus just on the research project, and I want to point out that a research fellowship award is equally weighted in 5 different areas. And so what does that mean? That means that you need to focus on all 5 areas, because each of them is an important aspect of a research fellowship award. It's not just what the project is. There's the candidate, the research environment, the project itself, the career development plan, and then the mentor. Could I have the next slide, please? The environment. So environments are an aspect that sometimes people don't fully understand how to make your environment look better. You might say, well, I'm here, the environment is good, but really you need to point it out in the application. So in the application, you need to demonstrate, is there a community of myositis researchers that are present? Are there tools and techniques that are available? Is the expertise available for you to succeed as an independent scientist? Is the patient population available? So if you say that you're going to do something on a group of patients, or you're going to enroll a subset of patients, do you have evidence that the patient population is there? That's what environment's about. Is there institutional commitment? So that can be a letter from your PI saying that this person will have a position here, whether they have this proposal that's funded or not. Those are important aspects. What will your clinical and research responsibilities be? So the environment that is committed to you will make sure that you have time to do research. If you have a position and you get this award and they say that you're going to do 75% clinical time, that's not a supportive environment. So those things need to be mentioned in the proposal to make the environment look good. How do you improve your environment? That's a question that I get asked a lot. So one way is to identify collaborators at your institution. So there are people, we'll say that you have a mentor who's never mentored somebody in toward an independent research career. We'll say they're a junior faculty member. That doesn't mean you can't do research with them, but maybe you want to identify a co-mentor or a collaborator that can be specifically help guide you on your independent research career as far as getting independent funding are examples of that. Demonstrating that your track record, so maybe in the area of myositis there's no track record, but maybe there is within the Department of Neurology, and that's important just to show that you're in an area where other faculty member have been on a path of independence, and that's a culture within your group. Maybe it's within the rheumatology department. It doesn't have to be a myositis grant, but maybe they've done stuff with lupus and have proven that they can mentor, the department is good at mentoring that population of young investigators. Can I have the next slide? The candidate. So the ideal candidate is someone who's demonstrated a commitment to a career in myositis research. That looks very different for different people. And so mentioning what your commitment is, how you've had a commitment to it is important. Maybe it's not myositis research, maybe it's immunology, maybe it's degenerative muscle diseases. Convince me that that's the good background that you need, and that's how you can enrich yourself as a candidate. A track record of success, so ideally someone who's been successful in what they've done. Explain gaps in training. We get it, we understand it, and we are we adjust productivity based on the individual candidate. And so if there are gaps in training, just explain it. And like I said, we reviewers are good at adjusting productivity for the individual candidate. If someone just got out of their PhD, we understand that they may be very different than someone who did an MD and a PhD and is finishing their fellowship. So, but point it out, explain it. Next slide, please. The research projects. So this is true for not just a mentored career award, but also for a pilot project. Make sure it's hypothesis driven, not something I'm just going to do. I'm just going to do a study and we'll see what happens. Really make sure you have a question and you tell me what the question is and that your aims demonstrate how they're going to prove that hypothesis. You often have several specific aims. Make sure they're related but not reliant on one another. And what does that mean? That means that if aim 1 doesn't work, I can't do aim 2. That's an example of a grant that aim 1 is or aim 2 is reliant on the success of aim 1. We don't want to have that, because that says to me that, you know, if I want to make sure that you know, it's understood that maybe all aims won't work, but if one critical aim is the crux for all the other aims, then maybe you need to do that preliminary experiment first before writing the grant. Demonstrate feasibility. If you suggest that you're going to do create a new animal model, let me know that you have the resources to do that, that you can feasibly do that. If you're proposing a new technique that's never been done before, but it's been done on patients with lupus, that's great. That's feasibility data. That's showing me that it's been done in lupus and it would be easy to transfer those technologies to patients with myositis. State your specific aims up front. You know, you want to make sure that on that first page that everyone knows what your specific aims are. And something that I think is important in all research grants is to explain your research and how you're going to do your research project. In the methodology, explain the rationale for the experiment. So why are you doing the experiment? And something that's really important is to tell me what you expect to find. So that tells me that you're thinking about it. So explain the rationale, expected outcomes, and then if those expected outcomes don't happen, what are your alternative strategies? And so it may seem silly to write a grant and to tell me what the answer is for the grant is with an expected outcome. But what that tells me is that you understand how to interpret a result that you're going to get and that you understand why you're doing the project. So in my grants, I have at the very end of each research strategy, I have an expected aims, alternative strategies, and pitfalls section that just kind of explains those 3 aspects. Next slide, please. The career development plan, this is important. You know, you're getting a research fellowship award, and the goal of it is to move on to a independent research career. And if you don't have a career development plan, that suggests to me that maybe you don't need the award. So you need to show me what you're going to do with this career. What courses are you going to potentially take? What meetings are you going to do? What techniques are you going to do? So you don't have to say that you're going to take courses. Maybe what you're using this time is to learn, you know, new imaging techniques, or maybe you're going to learn other techniques that are critical for your career development. But be specific. Don't say I'm going to take courses on biostatistics. Tell me the course you're going to take. Where is it at your institution? What course is it? What meeting are you going to go to? Specifically, I'm going to go to the American Academy of Neurology meeting, and tell me exactly when it's going to be. I want to see milestones of your career. So what are your 1 to 2 year goals? So they may be very simple. I want to publish a paper on this work. What are your 5-year goals? I want to get an independent faculty position. Think big. What are your 10-year goals? Your 10-year goals are to become a leader in the field. So, those are what we want to hear. I want to see the path that you're going to take. I want to read this proposal and say this person is going to move on and become an independent researcher and become a leader in the field. And basically explain to me why you need this award and how it will help you accomplish these goals. So that's what we want to see in the career development plan. Can I have the next slide, please? The mentors are a critical aspect. This is a mentored career development award. So it is a mentored research fellowship. It's in the title. So we want to find a mentor that has had demonstrated success in mentorship. Generally, they're an established investigator. We need to make sure that that person can support your research project. So demonstrated ability to support your research project. They have to have independent funding. Otherwise, we don't know how you're going to do the project. So they need to make sure that the mentor has it. You may need multiple mentors. It may be that one mentor can't satisfy all this. And so, for example, for my mentored research fellowship board, I actually had a clinical mentor, Alan Pestronk, and I had a basic science mentor, Phyllis Hansen. And I needed to have both those mentors because neither one could fulfill that. Collaborators can also enhance mentorship. So you can have a single mentor, but you can bolster it with collaborators. For example, one thing we often don't think about is a statistical collaborator. I need somebody that if I'm doing clinical research can help with the statistics, for example. Next slide, please. So I think one way that I learned the best is by looking at some bad summary statement responses and kind of talking about what were the reviewers actually thinking about this. And for full disclosure, most of these are from my own personal grants at times. So so these were some that I got. So so the first one here is research plan is generally well written, but thin on details of sample size and adequate power calculations. That's the downfall of many grants. It's so easy to put in there and tell people what your sample size is and what you need to do to get the power and how you did that. And that's a great exercise in actually finding a statistical collaborator, because you can actually use that to help put that in the grant. So those are important aspects. Number 2 here is there's not sufficient discussion about how results will be of future benefit to the career of the applicant and the field as a whole. So exactly what we were saying, for a career development award, I want to know how this grant is going to make you an independent person. Why do you need this grant versus somebody else? How is this going to make you be a future researcher? Preliminary data is not explained well, and the feasibility of the current project is not convincing. Demonstrate feasibility. That's a prime example. If I don't believe that you can do the project, then I'm going to say that it's a bad project. But if you demonstrate to me that you've already done this technique, or that you've already that you have the patient population in place, or that you have the sample sets already there, that's feasibility. That shows to me that you can do what you're saying. Specific aim 3 is not well developed, so make sure that you just don't tack on a last specific aim just because you think you need 3 aims. Maybe you don't need 3 aims. In this case, this was my 3rd aim, and I think I didn't give it as much effort as it probably should have. Not clear what he plans to do next. That's a great lesson right there. You need to say what the next steps are. So expected outcomes, and what are going to be the next step? What are you going to do after this? Sometimes at the very end, you can even write how this will move on to a new project, or what the next thing is going to be. Can I have the next slide, please? So the career development plan is poorly developed. The plan on how this training will be achieved and the timeline is not clearly mapped. No benchmarks of successful training provided. It's so easy to just put down there in 1 to 2 years, this is what my benchmark is going to be. In 2 to 5 years, this is what my benchmark is going to be. And so just lay it out. Just say exactly. That's how you write a competitive career development plan. This is the weakest part of the proposal, as this section is extremely short and vague with minimal specifics. Again, this is a bit duplicative. It's really unclear why this applicant needs further funding. I want to know why you need to convince me that you need this fellowship. This is going to help you achieve those goals that you just illuminated in the career development plan. The work described here is to be carried out at 3 different institutions, but there's no communication plan. So if you have multiple mentors or if you have a collaborative grant, let me know how you guys are going to communicate. And that can be as simple as we will schedule Skype calls once a month. You know, that's all you have to say. Just let me know how you're going to communicate, that you actually have a plan, that you've considered it. Or I'm going to have meetings with my, with my mentorship committee, quarterly, and tell me about that. But if you don't say it, I don't know that you're going to have it. Another example is, one thing that to make it even better is to say, I'm going to have monthly Skype calls with my collaborators, as we have been doing for the last year already. Well, there's no way I can refute that you're not going to do it, because you just told me you've been doing it for the last year. And so thinking of ways that you can demonstrate that you have a working group that's already present. Unclear if mentors read the application. This is quite common, and this gets into an aspect of, you really need to give your mentor time to read the application. You really need to give them time to give their input. Writing a grant and giving it to somebody because you're cut close on the deadline isn't fair to your mentor, so that they can give the appropriate amount of input. Can I have the next slide, please? So I think this is one of my final kind of slides here, and that is, focus on the Ames page. That's really often the only thing that a secondary or third reviewer will review, is really the Ames page. So make sure that's a compelling Ames page. Remember that all the elements of the grant deserve time and attention. So like I said, often we just focus on the research project, but there's many other aspects, such as the environment, such as your mentor. Right? Draft early, get advice from your mentor. Recognize that not every reviewer is an expert in your research. If you get a review back and the reviewer says that they didn't understand something, it's not because the reviewer didn't understand it, it's because you didn't explain it. And so recognize that you're explaining this to people that may not understand, mass cytometry, if that's what you're doing. So you need to explain it so that anyone can understand it. Explain why it's innovative. And the best way to do that is to just write a sentence that says, this research is innovative because. That's how you do it. Convince the reviewer that your project needs to be funded. And so we kind of talked about that. Next slide, please. So I just want to leave us with these kind of last points. The letter of intent does matter. We are going to initially triage based upon the letter of intent. So it does matter. Spend some time on it and make sure the elements are there. If it's a pilot project, make sure it's really a pilot project. Demonstrate a path toward independent funding. It can just be, with the results of this, we plan on, setting up a program project to look at it further or something. Emphasis on innovation, high risk, high reward is what we're looking for. Mentored research fellowships, a commitment to myositis research, evidence that you are going to be an independent researcher, demonstrated mentor and environment that will ensure your research and career success. And with that, I think I can answer some questions. Next slide, please. There.
Thank you, Dr. Weihl. So we'll now begin our question and answer session. And as a reminder, please use the chat function at the bottom of the page to type in your questions, and I will communicate them to the group. So I will be facilitating today's question and answer session in that way. Next slide, please. So as Dr. Weihl responds to the questions, this slide will be a reminder of the grant opportunities that TMA offers. So our first question has to do with, if I move to another institution, and am I able to take my award with me?
Yeah, so that's a common question that we get asked. For a mentored research fellowship award, you know, the goal is to become an independent scientist. And so, you know, awards have been transferred to other institutions. For a mentored research fellowship, you'd have to demonstrate that there was that mentorship was still present. But the goal is to launch you into an independent research career. And so if that was helpful, that would be important. If for a pilot project grant, the grant is to you. You would still have to demonstrate that you could do the project at the other institution. But yes, pilot project grants and mentored research fellowships have been transferred to other institutions. The grant goes to the individual, not to the institution.
Thank you. So the next question is, can a multi-center bid, so for example, with the UK and US sites, can it be led by a team outside the US?
Linda can correct me, but my understanding is these grants do not have to be, there's no requirement that it's a US
That's correct.
grant. So it can be whoever's the most appropriate.
That's correct. So I guess the question is, the answer to that question is yes, it can be led by a team outside the US. Another question, are there specific areas of myositis research that are reviewed more favorably in terms of focus areas for the grant?
So again, I can be corrected, but my understanding is there is not an area of myositis research that is more preferred. I believe that there might have been times in the past maybe where there were preferences, but my understanding is we look at all of them equally. Is that correct?
That's correct. And here's a question about the fellowships. Can fellows from other countries apply for the grants? And that too is, the answer is yes.
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
Not US based.
I think the challenge with fellows from other countries is that explaining clearly the path to independence and what that looks like can be different for different countries, and understanding what somebody's terminal degree is in another country can be challenging to understand on paper. And so just explaining, you know, that you fulfill that requirement is as far as being within 3 years of your last degree or last training period is helpful.
The next question is there an opportunity to respond to the reviewer's comments before a final decision is made?
No, and that's not something that any grant opportunities I know of. If you get as far as resubmitting the next year, if you received some comments, which we tried to give, that's different, but not before the final decision is made, no.
And another question, are epidemiological studies as attractive as more fundamental research for reviewers?
Absolutely, we fund you know, things as far-reaching as you said, epidemiologic studies, as well as even basic science studies. I know I tend to speak from a basic science standpoint, but that's not all that we're interested in. We're very interested in all aspects of human health, and epidemiology is absolutely an essential aspect. You know, one suggestion I would say, if you're writing up there, are epidemiologic studies as attractive as more fundamental research, I would also suggest that, so I'm telling you yes, but make it as attractive. Tell me why I should care about an epidemiologic study, because those are essential aspects.
Okay, and another question, would a pilot project for example, exercise be as highly regarded as a high risk in comparison to basic lab projects?
Um, it, it could be. I think you'd have to, so yes, so a clinical project can be a high-risk project. So one example was the one just from Lisa Christopher Stein, which was to look at gut microbiome in patients with dermatomyositis. So was a clinical grant. It does have a basic aspect to it. But if there's something innovative about the exercise, so I just saw a paper about community exercise experience in patients with IBM. I think that's innovative. I think that that is an example of telling me, that's a paper that came out, but I looked at that and thought that's a really innovative idea to start thinking about how community exercise programs can help patients with IBM. So absolutely, it's not just high risk, it's innovation as well. And you know, telling me the easiest way to make something high risk and innovative is to just tell me this is high risk because, and explain to me why it's high risk.
Okay. Next question, can applicants who already have fellowship funding from another funding body, for example, get a fellowship with a, so to speak, 50-50 ratio from each?
So I'm not sure. So can you, for example, can you have two fellowships at the same time, like another?
I think that's the question, yes.
I think those are, that's a tough question, because we recognize that that 50,000 doesn't cover sometimes the entire salary. And so I think I don't think I have an answer for that on the phone, and that might be something that we can get back to this person about.
Sure. So
Question.
if this person can send an email to tma@myositis.org, we will respond to that individually. Okay, so another question. Does a successful grant typically contain a strong clinical aspect, for example, relevance in patient tissue, or can they be purely basic?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I think typically that this person's correct, that there needs to be a clinical tie-in to it. This is a grant that's being given by the Myositis Association, so it needs to be demonstrated how this relates to myositis. And one of the best ways to do that is to show that it has relevance to the patient population. And so I think it's always good, and I probably should have included this in some of my comments, but I think it's always good as a basic scientist to include a clinical collaborator, just for grantsmanship issues, just so that somebody can see that if there are questions in the basic science studies that need some application to relevance, if this person's not a clinician, I think that's always helpful. So yes, I think that one of the criteria that we think about is relevance to myositis research.
Okay. Are patients or the public involved in decision process? Is it important to demonstrate patient-public involvement in the proposal? Is a lay summary required?
I don't know about the lay summary. Do we require a lay summary?
We typically do prefer to have a lay summary so that we can advertise it to our members, yes.
So all I can say is that the Scientific Advisory Review Committee reviews the grants, and we make a recommendation to the Myositis Board. The Myositis Board is made up of patients and other stakeholders. And so, you know, are they involved? I think it's always, you know, I don't, I can't, it's a step away from where we are. So we make recommendations. Does that sound fair, Linda?
Yeah, yes, yes.
I mean, it's not essential. I mean, I think demonstrating patient public involvement in the proposals important. I mean, it would make a difference to me too, so.
But I guess we could say that it's not something that we require in order to make the decision.
No. Yeah.
Yes, okay. Next question, can the funding overlap with other funding such as RRF Science Development Awards, T32s?
Yeah, so this is similar to the previous question. So a T32, you know, my understanding is a T32 would cover almost all of somebody's salary. So, so the mentored research fellowship is for covering salary. And so I think this would again be a question. My sense is that if you had a T32 or a mentored career award like a K award or something like that, that would make you ineligible for the mentored research fellowship. There have been examples, and I am the example of somebody who got a mentored research fellowship award through the Myositis Association and then received a K award through the NIH, and I had to give back my myositis grant. That is actually awesome. That's a success. I mean, that's exactly what we want. So if we can bridge funding even for a year until somebody gets an independent research mentored research fellowship, that's fine as well. So, but I would have to know more about how much those grants covered and things of that nature.
Well, and so here's another similar question. If I get a career development award and I no longer need the salary support, so I've got a faculty position or whatever, can I still apply, can I use that, the rest of the grant for research?
No. So we've been pretty clear on that. No.
Okay. Are there preferences from the wait, didn't we just get that? Okay, so I'll just say this. Are there preferences from the TMA according to IIM subtypes, for example, particular areas that the TMA wants to focus on?
Not at this point, no.
Okay. Does it count against me if I don't have any publications in this area?
So that's a great question. So again, it depends on where you are in your training path. So if you are new to the field and haven't had evidence of doing something with myositis, maybe your track record is appropriate because you could demonstrate that you've had a successful track record, maybe not related specifically to myositis, but if you can explain how your previous studies will set you up to try a new successful myositis grant, then that's important. So I think it doesn't necessarily have to be in myositis, but I think you have to demonstrate some type of productivity, some type of success. If you don't have any publications because you've mainly been doing clinical time and this is your first time to try doing research, just explain it. Just say, hey, for the last 5 years, I've been in a position which has been primarily clinical. I now have an opportunity to do research. That's part of the reason why my, track record in publication is low. Just explain it.
Okay. And can I expect feedback on my application if I do not receive an award?
So we've not traditionally been had the capacity to give feedback like an NIH grant or even a Muscular Dystrophy Association grant. So we've not been able to do that. We've tried to send out small aspects of why somebody didn't get funding. Sometimes it's hard. All grants have merit sometimes, and so it's hard to finally make a decision. If you had a question specifically, once you receive the feedback that we do give, I'd be happy to help elaborate on something if somebody had a question. I think our ultimate goal of feedback is we want good research grants. And if it takes a second try to make a good competitive grant, we want to help make it a good competitive grant.
Thank you. So if access to patient populations, tissues, or samples is a limiting factor, does TMA provide resources to help forge collaborations or facilitate access to patient material?
Yeah, so not specifically. So there's no, biobank or biorepository, but I would say that looking at anyone on the TMA advisory board that is a clinical person, emailing them, reaching out would be able to point you in the right direction. We have samples that we're happy to share. I know that Dr. Mammon has samples that they're happy to share. I think it really just requires reaching out and forging that kind of on your own. But there's no formal process for that.
Well, and I think on individual bases, we might be able to leverage the database that TMA has for specific projects on an individual basis. So if you need patients to respond to a survey, for example, that might be something that TMA can offer. And so here's a comment, not a question, but this person just wanted to say thank you for the webinar and found it very useful, which is a nice segue. Can we go to the next? We don't seem to have any more questions. Can we go to the next slide? So we want everybody on the webinar to know that we're having a myositis medical symposium during the time that we have our annual patient conference. It's a day-long seminar on September 6th in Minneapolis. It's a chance for healthcare professionals who are interested in myositis to get the latest research and a understanding from presentations from our medical advisors. It's free, but you must register in advance, and here is the link. It's also available through our myositis.org website, and we hope that some of you will plan to attend. Next slide, please. This concludes our webinar, and so we'd like to thank Dr. Weihl for this very informative presentation, and thank those who have participated for joining us in the webinar. Next slide, please. For more information, please see our website, myositis.org. There's a link for the grant program and the email address if you have questions or that you didn't get answered today. We'd be happy to send a response to you. And please be sure to complete the short survey that we will be sending into your email. Next slide. And okay.